so I'm here today to talk about 13 books that I'm very, very excited for, and I think you should have them on your radar as well. So in the Northern Hemisphere, we are of course getting towards autumn and winter, which is very exciting, I think, especially for a lot of bookish people who tend to be people who prefer the cosier, cooler months. So not only do I love reading more in the cosier and cooler months, I also love the books that are brought out in the cosier and cooler months. I found 13 books that I'm super excited about. I've got a really great mix here of books by authors I completely love. I've got some books from some of my favourite publishers. I've got 10 fiction and 3 non-fiction. I'm not very good at finding non-fiction to like pre-order, though I did recently do a video talking about some memoirs and personal essay collections that are new out that I wanted to try and read. So I'll link that above so you can hear about more non-fiction there if that is what you're interested in. But yeah, just a really great mix here, and some of my most anticipated releases of the year fall in this last section of the year. So just all in all, incredibly exciting. So I thought I would share this list with you, and you can let me know if you have any of these on your list and if there are any books that you think I'm missing from my list. And also, it's the first day that truly feels autumnal here. So if you can hear the very strong wind outside, I apologise. Well, I apologise if it's annoying for you. I actually love it. In our garden we have lots of really big trees that are like way taller than the house, which means our house insurance is a lot more, but it also means if there's even a slight breeze, it sounds like we're in the middle of a storm, which I love, although not so much when it's really bad and it's 2 o'clock in the morning. I'm absolutely terrified that the tree's about to come through our bedroom window. So that's what you might be able to hear. So I'm going to talk about the 6 books that are by some of my favourite authors first. So firstly, I'm going to get the most obvious one out of the way, and that is Beautiful World, Where Are You by Sally Rooney. I've seen this on most people's lists. I have read and really enjoyed both of Sally Rooney's previous books. This is a book I think about 4 friends and their friendship and whether they can find any beauty in the world, and I just love the way she writes inner thoughts and dialogue. I've realised that as a reader, this is something I've only realised about myself this year, I really enjoy good dialogue. If I like characters, or at least like the way they interact, I'm so excited when I see speech marks coming up, although does Sally Rooney always use speech marks, or does she not? She may not, but I'm excited when I can see coming up that there's dialogue, so I'm very much looking forward to this one, as lots of people are. This next one I'm also hearing is on a lot of people's lists, and that is The Fell by Sarah Moss. I'm really interested in the sound of this one. This is actually set during the pandemic. I haven't read any books that are set since the pandemic began yet, although I assume more and more will start coming out. And it follows a woman who, during the time in England when we were told we were only allowed to leave the house for like a little bit of exercise, we weren't allowed to go far at all, she went for a walk in the mountains, which was definitely too far from home, and she thinks, oh, no big deal, no one's even going to notice, and then she slips and hurts herself. Her neighbours do notice that she's gone, and it's like becomes like a rescue mission, but I think we're more focused on her and, you know, the tension of whether she'll be saved. And I guess this is also going to be a commentary on how that sort of selfish decision does inevitably lead to other people having to be involved, like people who go rescue and all that sorts of thing will be drawn into having to interact with people because of a selfish decision. I think this is really interesting. I don't know how it was in every country in the world, but it was something that was quite a big deal, at least in England during that part of the pandemic. There was a lot of aerial footage of people going for walks in national parks and saying, well, like, I just live right near a national park and I don't see why it's a big deal for me to go out walking because I'm not going to come across anybody. But if everybody did that, then we'd all be fucked. So it was all very selfish, and I think a book commenting on all that will be really interesting. And the next one is also by a Sarah, and it is also set during times of the pandemic, and that is Burntcoat by Sarah Hall. This is a fairly short novel. I have read, I think, 3 of Sarah Hall's novels, and how many of her short story collections have I read? I have read 3 of her short story collections, I think, as well. I absolutely love The Wolf Border and Madame Zero. They're one of my favourite novels and short story collections, and then her other books thought were either weak or so-so, but she is one of the authors that I am always most excited to see her have a new book. I have a list of 4 Sarahs who I'm always like keeping an eye out if they have new releases, and I bang on about them so much that Johnny knows who these 4 Sarahs are. And when I mentioned that there's a book I'm excited about coming out, he's like, is it one of the 4 Sarahs? Those 4 Sarahs are Sarah Moss, Sarah Hall, Sarah Perry and Sarah Waters. Just, you know, Sarahs are great. So this one is a fairly short novel. I'm going to read you the blurb because I think the blurb makes it sound very, it doesn't reveal much, but I think what Sarah Hall is very good at is quite dark writing about where women in particular will go. So this one says, in the bedroom above her immense studio at Burntcoat, the celebrated sculptor Edith Harkness is making her final preparations. Her life will draw to an end in the coming days. Downstairs, the studio is a crucible glowing with memories and desire. It was here, when the first lockdown came, that she bought Hallett, the lover she barely knew, a presence from another culture, a doorway into a new and feverish world. So, yeah. And it says, Hall's writing is alchemical, magnificent, divine, bodily. Here are new ways to understand what it feels like to be human. Here are books to cherish. Burntcoat is a masterpiece. I lay myself at the altar of everything Hall writes. And that is by Daisy Johnson. I think if you enjoy Daisy Johnson, in all likelihood you probably would enjoy Sarah Hall as well, although I would say that Sarah Hall is a stronger writer of the two, although she's been writing for a lot longer and has a lot more books out. And then another book by one of my favourite authors, and I think this will be a really big release this autumn, is the Book of Form and Emptiness by Ruth Ozeki. I have read 2 of Ruth Ozeki's previous books, and A Tale for the Time Being is one of my favourite books of all time. I know lots of people really love that one. I really want to reread that one as soon as possible. I wanted to reread it this year and I've not managed to fit it in yet. So, bizarrely, if I read the plot of this book, like the blurb, and didn't know it was by Ruth Ozeki, I probably wouldn't want to pick it up. But the fact that it's by Ruth Ozeki is making me more interested. It sounds like it has a slight fabulist element, and back in like 2015, 2016 I loved fabulist fiction, and I really don't as much anymore. I much prefer books that are realist, and if they do have an element of fabulism, I prefer it to be like bordering on like the dark and uncanny, rather than like just all out wackiness, if that makes sense. But this does tick some of my boxes, and like I said, I just love Ruth Ozeki's writing style. This follows a 13-year-old boy called Benny O. I love books from children's perspectives, so that's one tick. And we follow him 1 year after the death of his beloved musician father, and things in his house, inanimate objects, start to speak to him. He tries to ignore them, but they start to follow him outside the house and start to sort of give him guidance, I think. And he meets his very own book, a talking thing who narrates his life and narrates him to listen to the things that truly matter. It says this is classic Ruth Ozeki, bold, humane and heartbreaking. So I think this is quite a chunky book as well, which would be nice because I feel like I haven't read as many chunky books as I would like. Have I made that up? No, I haven't. It's 560 pages, so looking forward to that. And then these next 2, I've only read 1 book a piece from each of these authors, but I'm very excited for their upcoming books. The first one being Cracked Pots by Heather Tucker. This is actually a follow-on to The Clay Girl, which is a book I read and absolutely adored, like fell head over heels in love with a few years ago. And it's also a book that I've been a bit scared to reread because there was part of me that was like, was it too much? And on a reread, would I notice that and like be turned off? But I always knew there was going to be a follow-on. I think they're supposed to be a trilogy. So if you don't know, The Clay Girl follows a young girl who lives in Canada. I can't remember what bit of Canada, and she has quite a difficult life, and she tells her story, which is actually pretty bleak, in a really beautiful way. So the writing style is very lyrical, very verbose, and it makes her life feel like a fairy tale, even though it's anything but. And I thought it was beautiful, but the book leaves her at a point when she's then becoming like a young adult, so I think this next chunk is going to be that next period of her life, which intrigues me a lot. So I am actually planning to reread The Clay Girl because this book took longer to come out than I first anticipated, and it's been quite a few years. So yeah, we will see if I love it as much and what I think of Cracked Pots. I'm not going to read the blurb, and I'm not going to like go into detail because I don't want to spoil anything for anyone who hasn't read The Clay Girl, but I will link my review of The Clay Girl above. It's quite a few years old now, so I hope it's not awful. And then next, I haven't heard many people talk about this one and put it on their list, which surprises me quite a bit because I would think loads of people would have wanted to read this one, and that is Oh Beautiful by Jung Yun. So I previously read and really enjoyed, as did many others, Shelter by this author. So I was always going to pick up this author's next book, but actually sounds completely different. It actually sounds more like my type of book, but I'm quite surprised. So I was expecting another sort of thriller type book. So this follows a 40-something former model who's struggling to reinvent herself as a freelance writer. She's invited to come back to her sort of hometown in North Dakota to write about the oil boom. And it says she was raised by a distant father and an overbearing Korean mother. And it says after decades away from home, she finds the place unrecognisable. It says surrounded by roughnecks seeking their fortunes in oil and long-term residents worried about the changing community, Eleanor experiences a profound sense of alienation and grief. She rages at the unrelenting male gaze, the locals who still see her as a foreigner, and the memories of her family's estrangement after her mother decided to escape her unhappy marriage, leaving Eleanor and her sister behind. The longer she pursues this potentially career-altering assignment, the more her past intertwines with the story she's trying to tell, revealing disturbing new realities that will forever change her and the way she looks at the world. I think it sounds brilliant, and maybe it is going to be a bit more twisty and thrillery, but either way, I love the sound of all of those themes, and I really enjoyed Jung Yun's writing in Shelter. So then I have a couple of short story collections I'm really excited about. This first one is a short story collection anthology, so it has stories in it from 8 different authors. Books like this come out lots and lots around this time of year, and I don't tend to pick them up because I always think they've got a beautiful cover, but then I hear the reviews and they're not very positive. This one I have quite high hopes for, and it's called The Haunting Season, Ghostly Tales for Long Winter Nights, and it has a great cover. But like I said, there's 8 authors who have written a story for this one, and they're all authors where I've either read some of their work and enjoyed it, or have meant to read some of their work. So we have a story from Bridget Collins, Imogen Hermes Gower, Kieran Millward Hargrave, Andrew Michael Hurley, Jess Kidd, Elizabeth McNeil, Natasha Pulley and Laura Purcell. So I feel like that's a pretty good mix, and I definitely want to pick this one up. Let me know if you have this one on your list, and if you have any collections like this that you've read and previously enjoyed. And then we have Tainna by Norma. This one has a beautiful cover. I hope I've pronounced the title right. It actually means The Unseen Ones. So this has 6 short stories that are centred on modern day Inuk characters. It says ranging from homeless to extravagantly wealthy, from spiritual to jaded, young to elderly, and even from alive to deceased. Tainna's characters are united by shared feelings of alienation, displacement and loneliness resulting from their experiences in southern Canada. And I've heard a few really good reviews for this one already, and it sounds like the sort of short story collection I would love, so definitely want to pick this one up. And then we have a novella. This one's around 130 pages, so it's going to be a nice quick read. That's called Small Things Like These by Keegan. I haven't read this author's previous work, but I've always been interested in her books. This is set in 1985, and we follow a man who is a coal and timber merchant in the build-up to the Christmas period, which is a really busy time of year for him. And as he's making his round, he is thinking back on his past, and it says he encounters the complicit silences of a people controlled by the church. This is an unforgettable story of hope, quiet heroism and tenderness, and this has got amazing blurbs from lots of different authors who are just saying this is brilliant. Hilary Mantel says, a single one of Keegan's grounded, powerful sentences can contain volumes of social history. Every word is the right word in the right place, and the effect is resonant and deeply moving. And I really love books that explore social history through the experiences of one or, you know, a number of characters. And I also love when an author's work is described as like really precise and none of the words being out of place. So I feel like I could love this one, so definitely want to pick it up. And then we have 2 books published by And Other Stories. I really love keeping a lookout for And Other Stories. They publish lots of books in translation, but they also have a focus on books by northern writers in the UK and also by working class writers in the UK. So they have a really nice mix, and both of these books have truly beautiful covers, and both of these books follow young girls. I love coming of age stories, so I'm really excited to read both of these. The first one is translated from the Spanish, so it's called Oldladyvoice. It's written by Eliza Victoria and it's translated by Charlotte Whittle. I mean, look at that cover. Just glorious. These are really different covers but really beautiful in their own ways. So in this we follow Marina. She's sent to spend the summer with her grandmother because her mother is very ill in hospital, and she's not sure whether her summer will end with being able to go back to her mother or being sent orphaned to a convent school. And it says, there are no rules or grandmas, but there's also means there are no easy ways to fend off the visions of sex and violence that torment and titillate the girl. Presenting a unique and vivid take on the coming-of-age novel, Oldladyvoice reimagines childhood through the eyes of its one-of-a-kind, hilarious, perceptive and endearing narrator. So this one sounds like it could have a touch of humour but also some darkness, so very intrigued. And then we have Somebody Loves You by Mona Arshi. I mean, look at that cover, it is truly spectacular. I would have this as a print on my wall, it's beautiful. In this we follow a young girl called Ruby who is not talking anymore. It says she gave up talking at a young age. Her mother isn't always there to notice. She comes and goes and comes until one day she doesn't. Silence becomes Ruby's refuge, sheltering her from the weather of her mother's mental illness and a pressurised suburban atmosphere. So yeah, I really love reading stories, in particular when I'm reading stories from child narrators, from children who are isolated or let down by the adults around them, and find a way in which to cope that as an adult reader we're like, oh god no, like get some outside help, because this does happen to children and it's devastating, but also necessary for us to understand. So yeah, I think this one could be really upsetting, but hopefully a really beautiful read. And then another publisher that I always keep an eye on, I think people have asked me this before, but I have publishers who I know release books that I tend to find interesting. I guess the people whose jobs it is to like select their books have tastes that align with mine, and so what I do is just keep an eye on their catalogues and their new and upcoming releases. That's something anybody can look at on their website. It's not something I'm sent specifically because I have a channel or a platform, so you can sort of keep an eye out for what publishers you're enjoying when you read books and then go and have a look on their websites. So another publisher I've loved for many years is Tin House. They are an indie publisher based in the US, so I have to pick up their books from overseas, but most of the books they publish don't tend to be picked up in the UK market, so I don't like hang around and wait to see if it's eventually picked up here. And plus, they publish such beautiful covers that even if it was picked up in the UK market, I very much doubt the UK market could do a better job of the covers. So the first one is What Storm, What Thunder by Myrian J.A. Chancy. Again, stunning cover. This is set in Haiti, in the capital, after there is a earthquake that does lots of damage, and we follow a group of characters, which is something I really enjoy. I know some people don't like this, but I very much enjoy seeing the same experience from the perspective of multiple characters, because I think it's really interesting. I think it gives us a great insight into how people can live through the same experience but it feels so drastically different for them. I think it's a really interesting commentary on privilege, especially with stuff like this, with natural disasters, because natural disasters are lived through so differently, not only dependent on where they take place in the world, but the type of people who are in those locations when these things happen. So for example, we follow an expat and a wealthy water bottling executive. We follow an architect who drafts affordable housing structures for a global NGO. We follow a small-time drug trafficker. We follow a businessman, and then we also follow an emigrant musician. So a really mix of people who are going to feel very differently about their experience. It says it's a reckoning of the heartbreaking trauma of disaster and at the same time an unforgettable testimony to the tenacity of the human spirit. Sounds brilliant. I want to read it. And then we have Win Me Something by Kyaw Lucia Liu. Again, another stunning cover design by Tin House. And I love this title, Win Me Something. I just think it's a really brilliant title and makes me excited to hear what this book is about. It's another young girl coming of age story. Of course, this is my video, so there's going to be plenty of them. But in this one we follow a biracial Chinese-American girl growing up in New Jersey. She feels both hyper-visible and unseen. She has quite a difficult home life because of her parents' early divorce, and for years she feels really lonely until she becomes a nanny for a wealthy white family. And as she draws closer and closer to them, she starts to re-examine a lot of her growing up and her experiences. And it says, self-examining and fraught with the emotions of a family who fails and loves in equal measure, Win Me Something is a nuanced coming-of-age debut about the irreparable fissures between people and a young woman who asks what it really means to belong and how she might begin to define her own life. So, also sounds brilliant, and anything that has that title I pretty much want to read, so there you go. Another publisher I always keep an eye out for is Grey Wolf Press. Grey Wolf Press give a prize, I think every year, though it could be every other, to the best non-fiction book. So they accept submissions, they choose their favourite, and that one gets published. And I've read a couple of those winners and really enjoyed them, though I do mean to go back and read all of them if I can. And I thought this one sounded excellent, and that is Names for Light, Family History. So this is sort of like a memoir in essays. I've put a picture of the cover here. I'm not going to attempt to say the author's name because I always look up how to say authors' names and I can't find this author's name anywhere, I think because this might be her first publication. So I found a couple of readings she'd given, but she didn't introduce herself, unfortunately. So I don't want to butcher her name, so there it is. This author was born in Myanmar and raised in Bangkok, and she said a lot of her history was shaped by lots of death in her family, including the death of her, I believe, younger brother. And so this book is an exploration of the way her life has been surrounded by loss and grief and loneliness, but also colonialism, and after having moved to the US, how I guess she considers these things differently. It says that the book is written in pretty spare prose with lots of white space on the page, which I think is obviously a commentary on that loss and displacement. And I just think it sounds really interesting and like it's exploring themes that I in particular find very interesting, so I'm hoping to love this one. And the penultimate book with another beautiful cover, although I think most of these will have beautiful covers, is My Body Keeps Your Secrets, Dispatches on Shame and Reclamation by Lucia, Osborne, Crowley. And it says this is her first full-length book. It writes about the secrets a body keeps, from gender identity, puberty and menstruation to sexual pleasure, to pregnancy or its absence, and to darker secrets of abuse, invasion or violation, through the voices of women, trans and non-binary people around the world and her own deeply moving testimony. My Body Keeps Your Secrets tells the stories of the young person's body in 2021 in a daring and immersive literary form that the author describes as a non-fiction novel. So I think that sounds really intriguing. I don't know if I've ever read a non-fiction novel, and I feel like more books like that are being published, and it's a medium I would like to try and hopefully enjoy. So again, I'll definitely be picking this one up and hopefully reviewing it later in the year. And the last book I want to talk about is another memoir, and that is A Face for Picasso by Ariel Henley. This has a gorgeous colour palette on the cover. So I started listening to Disability Visibility earlier this year, which is an essay collection which I've heard lots of people recommend, and I was enjoying it, but I was struggling with some of the essays on audio just because I felt like I wanted to read them much slower and make sure I took everything in, so I paused. But one of the essays I had listened to and really enjoyed was Ariel Henley's essay. So as soon as I heard she had a full-length memoir coming out, in fact it's 400 pages, which is pretty chunky for a memoir and makes me even more excited, I added it to my pre-order list. So I can't wait to read this one. If you haven't read Disability Visibility, I would say that Ariel's writing style in that essay was incredibly readable. Obviously I was listening to it, very warm, very tender, and also at points quite humorous. So I think she has a really excellent voice, and I'm very much looking forward to spending 400 pages with her. So yeah, that is the last book on my list. Let me know if you have any of these 13 books on your list, and let me know if there's any you think I am missing from my list. And also, what has been your favourite cover of all of these books? I mean, lots of beautiful covers to choose from. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!